There was once a little girl. Her synagogue was her home away from home from the time she was 2 years old. Her earliest memories stem from there making sand cakes in the preschool sandbox and playing on the jungle gym. When she was 5, it was time for her to head to kindergarten. And she was a little afraid because she was going to be going to real school with a whole new set of friends. But it was made better by the fact that she would continue in the religious school, so she would still get to see her friends from the temple. By the time this little girl was 8, she and her synagogue friends were finally old enough to join the temple's children's choir. She and her friends had a routine. Every Tuesday, her mom would pick them up from school, take them for a quick snack, and then they would head over to the synagogue for rehearsals with the cantor. She loved dressing in her finest attire for the synagogue's family Shabbat services, showing off all of the melodies that she and her friends had learned. Stories like this little girl's describe a way of relating to synagogue life that can be challenging to replicate today. Synagogue participation is not what it was 30 or even 10 years ago. Rabbi, we just got married and we're trying to start a family. We're living in a tiny apartment and we're trying to save for a bigger place. We have too much going on. We appreciate you willing to work with us financially, but not this year. We'll talk to you next year. Rabbi, with our children grown, we want to take time to travel and be with our grandchildren. We just don't think we'll use the synagogue enough this year. I know I'm not the only rabbi having conversations like this. According to a 2020 Pew Research study, they are part of a larger national trend. The study found that only 35% of American Jews say they live in a household where at least one member of that home is a formal member of a synagogue. More than 50% of unaffiliated Jews said they choose not to belong to a synagogue because they express their Jewishness in other ways. Interestingly, survey results also showed that this group is consistently less engaged in Jewish life than Jews who do choose to visit a religious service at a synagogue at least once or twice a month. My conversations with people on the fence about synagogue participation eventually all boiled down to a single essential question. Why should synagogue life take priority over anything else? The synagogue allows members to feel a sense of belonging. The synagogue provides an outlet for people to explore who they are and who they can be. The synagogue provides space to feel something larger than ourselves. Is it possible, as American Jews, to be a part of Am Yisrael, the people Israel, without being part of a synagogue? Of course. Is it the same? I'm not so sure. Now, I know that in many ways I'm preaching to the choir because all of you are literally here in a synagogue. But if you're on the fence about the value of your involvement here, know that this place is for you. It's for you both during the high holy days and every single day of the year. I'm here to make the case for synagogue life, even when it's time-consuming, even when it's expensive, even when it simply feels like too much. The synagogue allows members to feel a sense of belonging. After a long battle with breast cancer, this little girl's grandmother died when she was 8 years old. The cantor and rabbi came to her parents' home and they all sat down in the living room to reminisce. Her grandmother had been a member of the synagogue too, cry and plan the funeral. This little girl had never been to a funeral, and she didn't really know what to expect, so she was a little bit nervous. But she was glad that the cantor she had gotten so close to in choir rehearsals, was going to be there to make it all more comfortable. Following the funeral, the family held Shiva in a packed house. This little girl hadn't quite comprehended what it meant that her grandmother was gone, but to be honest, she didn't really have time to think about it too deeply because she was occupied by an army of people who showed up, mostly from the synagogue, who made her family feel less isolated during this confusing time. There's a Hasidic parable that expresses the power of community that this little girl felt. Legend has it that 19th century Rabbi Chaim went to both heaven and hell, and he wanted to know the difference between both places. Upon first glance, they looked really similar. They were big banquet halls filled with food, tables upon tables of food. He first visited hell, and despite all this lavishness, the people looked miserable. They were starving. They were completely emaciated. And he looked a little closer and he noticed that the people's arms, they were splinted open like this, so that even though they could reach down and grab the food, they couldn't reach over to their mouths to feed themselves. Now, heaven looked really similar, but there was one key difference. It was still a large banquet hall filled with food and people together in this hall, but the difference was, even though their arms were splinted open, they were grabbing the food and they were feeding their neighbors across the table. When our lives feel overwhelming, when we can't quite feed ourselves, the synagogue can be the difference between living in hell and living in heaven. We're here to feed you when you need it most, and we hope that you'll be here to feed others when they need it too. How many of you came to Temple Emmanuel for our vigil the week following October 7th? I remember in our time together there, we were right here in this sanctuary with the dimly lit lights and the candles as we all sat in a circle. It didn't matter that we didn't have the right words. It didn't matter that we didn't know the fate that would befall the hostages. And it didn't matter that we didn't know what would happen to the state of Israel. All that mattered is that we weren't alone. We came together, we prayed, we sang, we did a whole lot of crying. And together we declared Am Yisrael Chai, the people of Israel endure together. Belonging to a synagogue means being surrounded by community for all of it, for the painful, for the joyous, and for everything in between that encompasses the human experience. The synagogue also provides an outlet for people to explore who they are and who they can be. Years passed, and this little girl turned into a teenager. By this point, the synagogue was an anchor against the tumultuousness of growing up. She loved her parents, and she was a really good student, but it was here that she had adult role models who weren't her teachers and weren't her parents. It was here that she tested social boundaries because she knew it was a safe space. It was here where she came to see her best friends, the same ones since preschool. They tried sleepaway camp and teen youth group, traveled to Israel and Eastern Europe. When she was 16, she attended a social justice seminar in Washington, D.C. with her synagogue and hundreds of other teens from across the United States. Together, they learned about pressing social justice issues. She got to lobby her congressperson passionately about why access to reproductive care is a Jewish value. Stories like this, teens, they're not unique. Every day here at Temple Emmanuel, I get to see people of all backgrounds access their full potential because this is a nurturing environment for them to do so. Whether it's our soul singers or our intergenerational choir singing their hearts out during worship, or 50 women attending a sisterhood retreat centered on the theme of unlocking your inner artist, this place is a meeting ground for the talents and interests of a diverse group of people unifying to express themselves and their Judaism in different ways. One of my greatest joys as a rabbi has been handing responsibility to teenagers and watching them step into their own power. Last year, 2 of our most involved teens here at Temple Emmanuel approached me and nervously asked if I would consider hiring them as co-religious school teachers. Absolutely. There is nothing that a rabbi loves more than being asked this question. I relish seeing young people take their Judaism so seriously that they choose to invest their time and their talents here, developing their leadership skills and sharing it with younger students. In turn, these younger students look up to them in complete awe of the type of Jewish leaders they too might one day become. Finally, the synagogue provides a space to feel something larger than ourselves. This little girl turned teenager of my sermon didn't begin to seriously think about God or holiness until she was in 11th grade, when she learned about Jewish theology in her synagogue's confirmation class. It was then that she realized she didn't need to have a particular understanding of God in order to be a good Jew. She wrote her confirmation speech on how she viewed her understanding of God similar to a painting. She viewed it as something ever emerging, always open for interpretation. Today, this little girl turned teenager is me, turned rabbi. I get to experience God in all sorts of ways here at Temple Emmanuel. My office overlooks our ECC playground. The holy sound of children's laughter sprinkles the heaviness of my day and reminds me of hope, of goodness, and that perhaps there is something larger than myself that I, as a mere human, possibly can't quite understand. Synagogue offers much of what our noisy, petty, cruel world often lacks: stillness, depth, knowledge, kindness, and yes, even a sense of the holy. Here, the outside world lulls itself as we immerse into rituals that have been practiced for thousands upon thousands of years in every corner of the world, even in the most inhospitable political climates. As political consultant Albert Eisenberg writes in his article, "Show Up to Synagogue," the synagogue is a reminder that I, like every Jew, have a role to play in the most extraordinary story humanity has ever known, of an adaptive and unique exiled people whose journey has been so strange, so shocking, so uncertain that it can hardly be an accident that God promised Abraham and Isaac that their descendants would be as numerous as the stars in the sky and just as scattered. There's a pleasant rhythm to the service, an aspect of communal meditation, and an activation of synapses that fire off with synchronized activities. Areas of our brain that have atrophied in us social animals degenerated by our device-curated individualism. Everything falls away as I sit, stand, and chant together with my brethren in shul. I don't always feel God, he continues. I do feel in the warm greetings of fellow congregants who I can't quite remember their names, or as I join other voices to support those saying Mourner's Kaddish and remember my own grandparents. I do feel much more than myself. I ask all of you tonight, what other institution in modern life provides a designated space to feel much more than ourselves? Today, as a rabbi, I believe so wholeheartedly in what we do here at the synagogue. I know that being involved in a synagogue is time-consuming. I know that it's expensive. I know that sometimes it simply feels like too much. But the synagogue needs you so that we can build a community of belonging, so that we can create meaningful moments during which participants access their fullest potential, so that we can coalesce into a holy minyan experiencing something larger than ourselves. Join us not only tonight, but throughout the coming year for worship, to teach Judaism to your children in our preschool or our religious school, to stretch your mind in our adult learning classes, or maybe join a committee, which is really just a group of people coming together to do good in the world. We want to walk through life with you. I close with a Torah story about our ancestor, Jacob, and I think it's no coincidence that his name is later changed to Israel. Exhausted and fleeing home, he decides to steal some rest in an unmarked place along his journey. Once his eyes close, he dreams of a ladder with God's angels climbing up and climbing down. And he dreams of God's presence beside him, reaffirming the covenant made with Jacob's grandfather and father. When Jacob awakes, he looks up, opens his eyes, and says, "Surely God was in this place, and I didn't know it." Perhaps the synagogue is like God's presence in Jacob's dream. So many of us are exhausted. So many of us are desperate for a sense of belonging, desperate to reach our fullest potential, and desperate to catch even a spark of holiness. Perhaps all of this is right here at the synagogue. It's been here all along, or at least since the 6th century when the synagogue first emerged. In all our searching of the contemporary era, maybe we didn't think to look right here in this place. Shana Tova and Am Yisrael Chai.